Published 2058 EDT, the 15th of August 2017. Updated 0221 EDT, the 16th of August 2017. David Davis was accused of being work-shy and a bully in an extraordinary Twitter rant by his former chief of staff. The Brexit secretary, 68, was besieged by former aide James Chapman in a series of tweets which began in the early hours of yesterday morning. Mr. Chapman, 40, accused him of working a three-day week since day one in the cabinet and claimed he was incapable of making his own ham sandwiches, instead requiring some unfortunate woman to do it for him. David Davis Wright was accused of being work-shy and a bully in an extraordinary Twitter rant by his former chief of staff. James Chapman left Mr. Chapman, who is trying to set up a new pro-EU party called the Democrats after leaving the Brexit department, claimed Mr. Davis displayed drunk, bullying and inappropriate behaviour towards Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott. He was referring to when Mr. Davis had to apologize for implying Ms. Abbott was not attractive enough to kiss in private text messages after the vote to trigger Article 50. Mr. Chapman also alleged Mr. Davis had Nigel Farage on speed dial and tried to get civil servants to store the former UKIP leader's number in his work landline, but they refused. Mr. Chapman wrote or retweeted 250 messages as he took aim at David Davis yesterday, and then claimed that it was totally inappropriate for Today presenter John Humphreys to conduct interviews about Brexit because he holidays with David Davis. But the show's editor Sarah Sands replied saying this was not true. It is understood Mr. Davis also rejects most of Mr. Chapman's claims. Mr. Chapman also claimed Mr. Davis takes 6 sugars in his tea and gets someone to stir it for him, that he never reads the contents of his ministerial red box, and that he once insulted the Slovakian Prime Minister by telling him, "If you think we are going to pay so you can sell us your cars, forget it." The former aide then said Mr. David drinks lots, together with the BBC's Andrew Neil, who replied saying, "Have dined with Dee once in 10 years, you were there, lunch, once in 10 years. Mr. Chapman's accusations were among 250 tweets he wrote or retweeted in his tirade yesterday. Asked what he made of Mr. Chapman's recent suggestion that the Brexit department is in chaos, Mr. Davis told LBC Radio James, "When he came to me I mean he was a Remainer, we knew that. But he did a good job, he was a good chief of staff. I'm not going to criticize him, I just don't do that, I'm afraid." The rant came as Mr. Chapman, the former political editor of the Daily Mail, announced his intention to lead the new party, the Democrats, during the People's March for Europe, which will take place on September 9 in London. After floating the possibility of a new centrist group earlier this month, Mr. Chapman said 2 cabinet ministers contacted him expressing sympathy for the call. Not true. Some of Mr. Chapman's tweets produced denials from people mentioned in them. He said, "I did my best to make Brexit work for a year and it won't. There is no upside, and it is clear that every sector of our economy will suffer for decades to come. Project Fear is Project Fact. The first duty of our politicians is to stand up for the interests of their constituents, and that means sound money and job opportunities for all. The MPs that have left Britain careering towards a cliff worse than Black Wednesday have failed in that duty and are guilty of misconduct in public office. The March on Parliament will be for members of all parties and none but I will be announcing my intention to lead a new party, the Democrats, which will reverse Brexit with no second referendum. It's time for all of those with consciences to put nation before country and make sure we are Great Britain once again, not the Little Britain of Nigel Farage and Vladimir Putin's wet dreams."